Assessments of anaerobic fitness is an important part of the overall assessment of physical capacity for both athletes and physical clients. Anaerobic power is the rate of performing work under conditions in which aerobic metabolism offers little contribution. When evaluating anaerobic capacity tests, you can often calculate peak power, mean power, or fatigue rate. Peak power is the highest power output attained during a specific test, whereas mean power is an average collected during the test. Fatigue rate is the degree of power drop-off during the test. I will now be discussing some anaerobic tests that can measure anaerobic fitness. But before I go into those explanations, remember, before starting any test, you must have the subject complete dynamic stretches. Now, I will go into the sprint test. The sprint test is a test that tests sprinting performance. In order to complete the sprint test, you will have 4 timers, one at 10 yards, one at 40 yards, one at 50 yards, and one at 60 yards. Once the subject passes each marker, the timer will stop their stopwatch. The subject will sprint from a starting position all the way to the 60-yard marker. Once the sprinter passes the 60-yard zone, they will go into a deceleration zone for 25 yards. Next, there are the jumping performance tests, which uses a vertex or a wall-mounted board for marking vertical displacements. The first test will involve counter movement. To begin, you will have the subject establish a reach height, which will involve the subject standing with their feet together, and they will reach their dominant hand as high as possible, and that will determine their highest reach point. After establishing the reach height, you will have the subject get into their starting position. The starting position involves the subject having their feet approximately shoulder width apart. After achieving this position, the instructor will have the subject perform a counter movement by dipping the hips and legs while swinging the arms prior to pushing off the ground, and while in the air, the subject should reach for the highest possible point on the wall or hit the highest possible veins of the vertex. Have the subject perform a total of 3 counter movement vertical jumps, separated by 2 minutes each. Next, we have the static vertical jump test. The subject will start in the same starting position as they did for the counter movement test, but this time they will go into a squat so that the tops of the thighs are parallel to the floor, and then we will then have the subject hold the squat position for 3 seconds. Then have the subject rapidly extend the knees, hips, and ankles while swinging arms up in order to touch the highest possible point on the wall or move the highest possible vein on the vertex. Another method of evaluating vertical jump would be to use a switch mat. Switch mats contain embedded micro switches that measure the time interval between takeoff and landing. Next, to test power endurance, you will have the subject perform as many counter movement vertical jumps as possible on a forced platform or a switch mat. To test anaerobic cycling power, you will complete the Wingate test. You will need a monarch cycle or equivalent. The test involves 2 phases. The first phase lasts 5 to 10 seconds, and it requires the subject to pedal at 20 to 50 revs against 1/3 of the prescribed resistance. The second phase requires the subject to increase the pedaling rate to maximum, which generally takes 2 to 5 seconds. The prescribed load is then applied while the subject cycles at the highest possible speed until the end of 30 seconds. Lastly, the Margarita-Kalaman stair climb test can also be used to assess anaerobic power. This test involves having a staircase that meets the requirements, and you will place switch mats on the 3rd and 9th step. If a switch mat is unavailable, have a timer at the 3rd and 9th step. Once the testing area is set up, you will then have the subject run up the stairs as quickly as possible, and you will have the subject complete this test twice.